Mr. Pillai, I consider this a privilege to have the opportunity to interview you and for you to agree to this interview because it is important for the generations to come to understand the complexities of leadership. Because a lot of people make it seem like if you follow some of the dicta, you just need to execute it. It's not as simple as that because you're dealing not with widgets but with people. Now, one of the people you have always admired, and you had the pleasure of serving with him for 24 years, I believe, in the civil service, was Hon Siew Sen, the then finance minister. And in the Civil Service College speech, you highlighted three aspects of leadership that he sort of emulated. Right? Firstly, it was about integrity. Secondly, it was about the ability to trust and delegate, without micromanaging. And thirdly, stimulating ideas, eliciting ideas from the ground. These all three are easier said than done. So let's start with the whole question of integrity. It's an often used word in leadership circles, sometimes misused. But what exactly is leadership?
Leadership, it's strange. I observe qualities in leaders and I try to identify what makes them successful or why they slip up from time to time. I haven't done so much of psychoanalysis of myself to figure it out because I never considered myself an outstanding leader. They talk about leaders, John Wayne leading in front, and others who are at the back pushing their flock forward. And yet others go hand in hand, very affiliative types. I never know where I stand. But you're right about Hon Siew Sen. He was one of the outstanding people I've known. I had two outstanding bosses, Hon Siew Sen and Goh Keng Swee. Now there were others. There were other ministers whom I had great respect for. Lee Kuan Yew, no doubt. Toh Chin Chye, Rajaratnam, Kim San. Those were men of great competence.
They were giants.
They were giants, yes. And we were standing on, you may say, their shoulders. Now, Hon Siew Sen,
integrity.
Hon Siew Sen and Goh Keng Swee had many qualities in common, but their styles were different. In terms of intrinsic qualities, I don't think there was that much difference between Dr. Goh and Mr. Hon. Both had a very strong sense of compassion, not just for the people reporting to them, but for society at large. A very important factor. Want to be a leader. But when it came to relationships between each of them and their subordinates, there were differences. Both were extremely loyal, but Hon Siew Sen, let me put it, Hon Siew Sen was a perfect gentleman. And no matter what the circumstances may be, whether he woke up on the right side of the bed or not, didn't matter at all.
Some people say that leaders should be charismatic, and charisma is often associated with a certain amount of turbulence, fluctuation of moods, and it can be quite exciting or extremely tense. On the other hand, there are quiet leaders whose quality predominantly is equanimity. There's a certain predictability. How would you say that in terms of leadership, the two styles, I mean, here you talk about Goh Keng Swee and you talk about Hon Siew Sen. Hon Siew Sen, equanimity, a certain predictability, but yet not without being exacting, right? On the other hand, you have someone like Goh Keng Swee, who who also was known to inspire fear in people, fear of repercussions. If you could comment on these two styles, what are the pros and cons of these two styles?
Personally, I don't know whether that's so terribly important. It's a function of behavior, and subordinates adjust to it. Let me put it this way. We used to practice a form of job evaluation in the civil service. And I can't quite remember what all the paraphernalia of the assessment, but at the end of the day, you place them into action-oriented people and thinkers. Thinkers were a quieter type, not so John Wayne-ish. Most leaders were in that category. And if you go through the literature, you'll find they were had a more sustainable record. Yes. Very reflective, deep thinkers. Those are the qualities you need in the leader. That's necessary, but not a sufficient condition. You need all these other factors of consistency and everything else, integrity. But that was the dominant thing. And further down you go in the hierarchy, this is quite common knowledge, the action-oriented people, the foreman, the supervisor, the lower management, they've got to deliver the goods. The widgets have to be produced, and sometimes they have to use the rod. And as you move up, then the demands veer towards the thinking, and that means a quieter type of activity. If your managers, your middle-level managers tend to retain those attributes that they exercised when they were at a lower level, there's always trouble in the organization.
That's one of the criticisms leveled against several people in leadership positions, that people are moved up too fast. Because from what you have said so far, there is a certain time needed for that transition from the action-oriented to the thinker, right? You can't pressure cook that. But because of the exigencies of time and space today, there seems to be a truncation of that process, right? People are forced to move from the action-oriented to the thinker very fast. What are the challenges and what are the dysfunctions as a result of that?
I would always look at why that situation is developing. What has caused it? Was there some rupture in the organization? Or was it, I think more likely, the captain being asleep, not knowing what was going on until there was an eruption? In Japan, accountability is very harsh. Anything wrong in the organization, a train, there's an accident, the Minister of Transport commits harakiri.
He just bows.
He bows and he takes it and he resigns.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting we should follow the system, but that's the ultimate. And you recognize that accountability, you can delegate authority and the appropriate accountability, but if you don't wash your hands of accountability, you're accountable for your subordinates' accountabilities.
When you were chairman of SIA, quite a few of your colleagues at various levels have highlighted that you are a good listener. Decisive, but a good listener. Quite often, I come across people citing the two as contradictions. That a decisive person doesn't consult. I would put it to you that actually a person can be decisive if he consults continuously. How would you respond to that?
The worst thing to do is to shirk the responsibility of making a decision. subordinates find that most annoying. There's no leadership. Please make a decision. Doesn't matter if it is not the correct decision, but there is a decision. We'll proceed. And if it doesn't need it, okay, you find some way. You're the leader. You find some way of rectifying it. Incidentally, I don't believe there's anything such as a perfect decision. Every option has pros and cons, and that's your job as a leader when it comes to the crunch, to decide which you think is the best option. Your subordinates may not think that is the best option, but they'll follow you if you give decisive leadership.
But why would they follow you?
They follow you because that's their responsibility to accept what the decision the leader takes. They've given their views, he has decided, everybody in the organization must follow. Yeah. Otherwise there's going to be dysfunction. Subordinates not accepting the decision wholeheartedly.
Yes.
At worst they try sabotage. At best it's grudging. Okay, anyway, you do what you do. I mean, you may not give it everything that you've got, but you comply. Should not be the case. I mean, the leader probably did not listen enough, or the subordinate is not should not be where he is.
But if you listen enough, you'll be able to see, to ascertain whether the subordinate should be where he is.
Exactly, exactly.
Is that one of the challenges organizations are facing, that leaders are not listening enough or sensing enough?
Yes, of course. It happens all the time, everywhere, because we are not perfect, you know. I'm sure I've been guilty of it myself, in both directions. Downwards and upwards. You know, not being fully supportive of decisions that I didn't think much of. Or sometimes even worse, you may say, didn't think much of the individual.
How do you deal with that?
With great humility, which, you know, very difficult to muster.
Wasn't that one of the things that you really respected about Hon Sen? That when it came to battles that you can't but win or compromise on, he had the gumption and he stood the ground. He knew the battles to fight.
Yeah.
He chose them well.
He chose them well, yes. He was not always right, mind you. He was a human being.
But he had to make a call.
He had to make a call. And eventually he recognized, you know, if he was chasing the wrong hare.
Let's maybe go down to a particular decision, right, that gained quite a lot of press. You know, your decision when you first, in the first couple of years as chairman of SIA, where you made the bold, calculated, albeit, move to buy 19 Boeing aircraft.
Oh, okay.
Right, the famous sale of the century accolade that was announced. It's a huge amount of money at that point in time. Could you share with us what went through your mind and what was the process that led to this decision?
We had an earlier decision which was even more, may say, controversial within upper reaches of government. It was the decision to buy Boeing, Boeing 747 aircraft. We made that decision in the board. It required a heck of a lot of money, and we did need a government guarantee to the Exim Bank of Washington, D.C. There was a lot of money for us in those days, a small company, and Singapore didn't have, you know, the billions that it now has. So the cabinet got a bit queasy and they quizzed us. Hon Sen was the finance minister. So they didn't summon me to the cabinet to explain, thank goodness. We sent them a stack of documents, you know, that we used to do our evaluation and to make an assessment of our financial condition, our financial forecasts. And after that, we never heard from cabinet. No veto, so we went ahead. This was in the early 70s. But the second decision towards the end of the 1970s for, I don't know how many aircraft, 19,
19.
Amounting to 900 million US dollars, which was the biggest at the time ever placed by any carrier. So that's why we attracted world attention. That wasn't such a groundbreaking decision from our perspective. The company, the board, or for that matter, the cabinet. By that time, the cabinet was quite relaxed. It didn't put any query in our direction at all.
Because you had already built a track record.
Exactly. There was a track record. It was interesting, you know, how SIA developed in the 1970s. We were the only airline in Asia that had the gumption to do these, to think big. Nothing to do with me, I must confess. It all came from management, and we supported them. I could see it, you know. I mean, I must say I had a responsibility, of course, you know, supporting management when they brought these proposals to the board, or rejecting it. And where I said no, it would have been no. But I had confidence in management. I knew them well. I saw their record, and I noticed that all the carriers around us were so pusillanimous.
Yeah.
Most of them were government-owned, no big ambitions. They just wanted a soft life.
So what made us different?
Well, the government told us, you guys, you're on your own, no subsidy. And I think it would have been against our pride to accept any subsidy from the government. We didn't want it. We said we could do our own thing. And we defied the big powers, the IATA, which laid down strict conditions about how much you can charge for a ticket and what you can serve on board and things like that. We said, to hell with you, we go our own way, we're not members of IATA. So all that needed, you know, a bit of iconoclasm. Iconoclasm. We were iconoclasts.
How much of self-efficacy, gumption, would one have to have when you know that you're not going to get very much of financial support if things should go wrong? Your head, as well as your management's head, would be on the chopping block.
Yeah.
And therefore you are accountable to them as well,
Sure.
right? If you make the wrong decision,
Yeah.
right? The easier option would have been to go the way the others have gone.
Yeah.
You'd have kept your job.
Yeah.
They would have kept their job. Why risk it?
Maybe we didn't have all those risk control tools that you find now.
Yeah.
So we were not so conscious, you know, honestly, of the penalties of error. I don't think at any time within the board or in discussions with management, the question, this issue arose that, you know, what's going to happen to us if we fail. I think we all felt, you know, terrible things could happen. We never expressed that. But at the same time, we had done our calculations, you know, quite thoroughly. And we had confidence. We had confidence because we had registered some successes. They are still very confident chaps in SIA.
Yeah.
They don't have such a big lead now over the other carriers, but they're very confident of their ability to maintain a lead. Yeah. I must tell you something about leadership. There was a German general between the wars. Must have been a Prussian. He had rejoiced in the name of General Baron Kurt von Hammerstein -Eckwald. You know, and he was the equivalent of our CDF. Hitler was building up his army. He, for some reason, fell out with Hitler, and so Hitler bundled him out in 1934. But he was recorded as having said, I categorize my people into 4 boxes. He said, my people, I divide them into 4 categories. Each of them I measure against 2 dimensions. One is intelligence and the other is industriousness. And he said, the guys who are intelligent and industrious, what you would find in the top right-hand box. Excellent people, I put them in my general staff. My general staff, that's where you would expect civil service. Ultimately, the staff controls everything. He says the lazy and the stupid, the 4th category, they have their uses in certain conditions. This is the army, cannon fodder,
Yeah.
things like that. The 3rd category, the industrious and the stupid, they are the most dangerous of people. Get rid of them.
Yeah.
You know, it applies even in civilian life. And he says the 4th category, bright guys, but slothful, lazy, they are your leaders. They have the clarity of mind and the self-discipline to be able to make the right decision at the right time. Very, very interesting. I don't know how many of our top leaders know about this general, but he did exist. It's not a yarn. It's true.
No, I can see that, because it's about perspective, isn't it? That comes with distance,
Absolutely.
right? That's what you're talking about. If you're in the trenches,
Yeah.
you can't lead. The question here is, does distance and the perspective that comes with distance necessarily translate to being disconnected? Because sometimes that happens too, right? You gain perspective from distance, but the distance then translates to a certain emotional and even a logical disconnect with the people you're serving.
It means you're not intelligent enough. But it also means that you're withdrawing from the day-to-day strife, and you're reflecting on it. You appear to be lazy, not to be doing too much, but you're thinking, you look at some of our Taukes, how did they reach the top in the old days at least? They were all traders. So they were constantly observing, thinking, and figuring out, where to go, whom to, how to do this. And that's how they rose. They were not maybe the brightest of the brightest, but sufficiently bright and sufficiently relaxed and detached.
The one thing that you are most clearly associated with,
I'm cool.
focus. You are obsessed
Yeah.
as a leader with focus and the clarity that comes with focus. I remember, I don't know whether you recall, in Sindar, you had asked me to write a paper some time back.
Yeah.
When you were president of Sindar House on
I
Exco.
had the temerity.
Yeah, yeah, you did. So I did, and I went out there and I spoke to people who had written papers for you. I checked these papers, and all of them had some of them had 3 objectives. So I came and presented the paper to you with 3 objectives. And in your usual urbane style, you know what you told me? You told me with that half smile, you told me, you are intellectually lazy. That's the exact words you used. You told me I was intellectually lazy. And
Wow.
because I did not spend time to come up with one objective, I was happy to just mention 3. And you told me that I should go back and think deeper and come up with one objective. But I told myself it's impossible because there are 3 objectives. But you didn't give me a choice. But I went back and I did come up with one objective. Why this obsession?
Because I've had so many instances in the past where people come along and say, yeah, you know, but we didn't achieve that objective, but we achieved the other one. But to me, that first objective was the more important. And why didn't you focus on that? So there must be absolute focus. No, and that comes from the Gita.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I learned that also from the Jesuits, because I went to a Jesuit school. Yeah. Whatever the objective is, you've got to decide for yourself. It may be right, it may not be right, but that's it. Don't be distracted. Of course, if you find in the fullness of time that you are chasing a will of the wisp, then you stop, do something else. But while you're pursuing that objective, just focus on it, whatever it is.
But being focused, clear about one particular objective, does it necessarily lead to you not having enough peripheral vision, looking at the spectrum of other issues that are related to the problem on hand?
Just because you focus on an issue doesn't mean you wear blinkers. You're aware of what's going on around you. And if it's not going well, you begin to consider the options. What are the options? And then it's a question of how soon you react. Sometimes, you just persist doggedly and find that you've dug a deeper and deeper hole. And you say, stop. Something has forced your hand, you have to stop.
Okay, last question. Could you share with us in one paragraph, pithy, what you think is what kind of leadership is most needed and necessary in today's Singapore? Without necessarily making any reference to people, but what do you think is the most important, and where do you think is the unmet need in terms of leadership, the style of leadership in Singapore today?
I don't think it's a function of the various attributes of leadership. But what I would like to see among leaders in Singapore is greater awareness of the uncertainties before us, to realize that there's no such thing as a right decision. They've got to be humble enough to recognize that. To be always conscious of the other strands of opinion and the other constituencies. Now, I'm not suggesting that leadership in Singapore is deficient in those, not at all. In fact, I think they're trying very hard, leaders in every walk of life in Singapore, trying very hard to take this into account without necessarily rationalizing it. They do it. It comes, you may say, subliminally, not naturally, but subliminally, because of they're conscious of what's going on around them, not just in Singapore, but in the world.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.